It was a Friday morning in late spring when I realized just how far the HOA was willing to go to control people's lives. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when I saw it, a crisp white envelope taped to my front door. The red ink bled through slightly, spelling one word that made my stomach drop. Violation. I pulled it off and read it right there on my porch. Unapproved exterior modification. Shutters painted in unauthorized color. Fines will accumulate daily until rectified. Gray shutters. That's what this was about. Gray shutters, the same color half the neighborhood had. At first I laughed. Out loud. I thought maybe it was some mistake, a clerical error. But as I looked across the street, I saw her, Karen Latham, the HOA president. She was standing next to her spotless black SUV, clipboard in hand, her HOA badge clipped to her blouse like a sheriff's star. Two of her assistants, matching polos that read HOA Enforcement, were walking along the sidewalk taking photos of driveways and lawns. Karen caught my eye, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she gave me this smug, knowing smile. The kind that said, "You'll play by my rules, or you'll regret it." That's when I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I'd lived in Cedar Ridge Estates for 5 years. It was a picture-perfect suburb outside Austin, Texas. All manicured lawns, quiet cul-de-sacs, and matching mailboxes. It looked peaceful from the outside, but beneath that calm surface, the HOA ran everything like a private kingdom. You couldn't change a light bulb without permission. You couldn't park on the street past midnight, and you sure as hell couldn't paint your shutters the wrong shade of gray. I joined this neighborhood thinking it would be a good place to build a life. But now I was learning what everyone else had already figured out. Once the HOA targets you, they don't stop. That first notice was just the beginning. Within a week I had 3 more, one for trash cans visible from street view, another for improper mailbox design, and one absurd one claiming lawn height exceeded maximum limit by 2 inches. 2 inches. It felt personal. Now I tried reasoning with Karen once. I went to the next HOA meeting, stood up calmly, and asked if we could review the violations. But Karen didn't like calm. She liked control. She interrupted me 3 times, waved her papers in the air, and finally said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Rules exist for a reason. Mr. Lewis, if everyone starts bending them, this neighborhood will fall apart." There was laughter in the back of the room, a few of her loyal followers nodding along. I clenched my jaw but didn't argue, because while she was playing neighborhood politics, I was already planning something else. That night, I sat at my desk with my laptop open and a glass of bourbon sweating beside it. I wasn't just an HVAC technician anymore, not for long. Over the years, I'd saved, invested, and quietly bought small properties around town. Duplexes, fixer-uppers, rental homes. And as I looked through property records for Cedar Ridge Estates, something caught my eye. A few of the homes, including Karen's, were built on land leased through a holding company that the HOA didn't technically own. It was held under a small real estate group called Mosswood Properties, which was struggling financially. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. If I could get in touch with Mosswood, maybe even buy them out, I wouldn't just be a homeowner anymore. I'd own the ground Karen's perfect little HOA kingdom stood on. But before I made any moves, things got worse. 2 weeks later, I came home to find a bright orange sticker slapped across my front door. Final notice, foreclosure proceedings pending. They were trying to take my house, over paint. That's when the calm part of me died. I took photos of everything, the notices, the emails, the recorded calls. And then I called my attorney friend, Mark Dalton, who specialized in property law. He laughed when he heard my plan. "You're serious?" he said. "You're going to buy the company that owns the HOA's land lease?" "Dead serious," I replied. "Then, my friend," he said, "let's make them regret ever learning your name." Over the next month, while Karen and her HOA enforcers kept sending fines, I quietly met with Mosswood's owners. They were desperate. Their debts were crushing, their commercial properties half empty. They were willing to sell off the land leases for Cedar Ridge Estates at a fraction of market value, as long as the deal was quick. I liquidated nearly everything I had, sold a rental duplex, pulled savings, even cashed out an old business investment. And on a humid Tuesday morning, I signed the papers that changed everything. As of 10:47 a.m. that day, I owned the land beneath Cedar Ridge Estates. Karen Latham didn't know it yet. But the man she'd been threatening to foreclose on now owned her backyard. That night, I stood at my window and watched as HOA trucks made their rounds. They still placed violation slips in mailboxes, still knocked on doors. But this time I wasn't angry, I was patient. Because justice doesn't always come in the form of shouting. Sometimes it comes with a signature and a smile. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious and because I couldn't stop smiling. Every HOA rule, every violation notice, every ounce of their arrogance now sat on land that I legally owned. The very ground beneath Karen Latham's house, her garden, her mailbox, all of it. The power had shifted. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up early and brewed a pot of strong coffee. I printed the property transfer documents, each page stamped and notarized. I slipped them neatly into a folder labeled HOA Land Lease, Cedar Ridge Estates. Then I waited. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, as predictable as clockwork, the white HOA golf cart rolled by. Two enforcers in their HOA compliance uniforms stopped in front of my house, snapping pictures of my trash bins. I stepped outside with my folder in hand. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, smiling. One of them, a tall, skinny guy named Doug, frowned. "Mr. Lewis, you're still in violation of section—" I cut him off, calm and confident. "Actually, Doug, you might want to tell your boss that the ground you're standing on isn't HOA property anymore." They looked at each other, confused. I handed Doug a copy of the first page of the deed. He squinted at it, then his eyes widened slightly. "Mosswood Properties?" he muttered. "Used to be," I said. "Now it's mine." I turned back toward my porch, leaving them stunned. I could feel their eyes on me the entire walk back inside. Within 20 minutes, my phone buzzed. "Caller ID, Karen Latham." I let it ring twice before answering. "Mr. Lewis," she said, voice sharp and clipped. "I just received a rather interesting message from my enforcement team." "Something about land ownership?" "Yep," I said, sipping my coffee. "Looks like I own the land your HOA operates on now." There was silence on the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head. "That's impossible," she finally said. "Check the records," I replied. "County clerk's office. Recorded this morning." Another pause. Then her voice dropped an octave. "You think this little stunt gives you power over us?" I smiled to myself. "I don't think, Karen. I know." And then I hung up. By noon, I saw her black SUV speeding down the street, stopping right in front of my driveway. She stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots against the pavement. Behind her were two HOA staffers with clipboards. She didn't knock. She shouted, "Mr. Lewis, I need to see that documentation." I stepped outside, folder in hand, calm as ever. The neighbors peeked through their blinds, watching the confrontation unfold like a live TV show. I handed her a copy of the signed deed and lease documents. She flipped through them furiously, scanning each page. Her face changed color when she saw the official seal. "This doesn't mean anything," she snapped. "We still control operations here." "Oh, I know," I said smoothly. "You control operations. I control ownership." Her lips tightened. "What exactly do you think that means?" "It, means," I said, stepping closer, "that every meeting, every parking lot, every inch of sidewalk you enforce rules on now belongs to me. And if you're planning to keep using it, we'll need a new agreement." The HOA assistants shifted nervously behind her. Karen's voice trembled, but she kept it together. "You're bluffing." I smiled. "Try me." By that evening, my name was on everyone's lips. Neighbors who used to avoid me were suddenly dropping by, curious and cautious. Some whispered congratulations, others just wanted to know what came next. A few of them, the ones Karen had fined for petty reasons, seemed almost giddy. One man, Robert from down the block, said, "You really did it, huh? You bought the damn neighborhood?" I laughed softly. "Not the houses, just the dirt they sit on." He grinned. "Close enough." But I wasn't done. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted accountability. Over the next week, I hired a small legal team to draft a new operational agreement for the HOA's use of the land. It included rent for common areas, maintenance fees, and, most importantly, a clause requiring board transparency and open financial reporting. If they wanted to keep their HOA intact, they'd have to play fair. I sent the proposal to Karen, with a polite note attached, for continued operation of Cedar Ridge HOA facilities under new ownership. Please review and sign within 14 days. I half expected her to tear it up. Instead, she called an emergency meeting. That night, the community center was packed. The usual smiles and pleasantries were gone. It felt tense, electric. Karen sat at the head of the table, papers spread before her. When I walked in, all eyes turned to me. Some glares, some admiration. Karen cleared her throat. "Mr. Lewis," she said, "would you care to explain to our residents why you think you can hold this neighborhood hostage?" I didn't sit. I stood tall in the center of the room and let the silence stretch. Then I said, calm but firm, "Because you tried to take everything from me over paint. You bullied residents, fined people unfairly, and hid behind bylaws you didn't even understand. I didn't buy this land to punish anyone. I bought it to make sure that never happens again." The room was dead silent. A woman in the back, someone Karen had fined for planting the wrong flowers, whispered, "Good for him." Then another voice said, "About time someone stood up to them." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "This is my neighborhood," she snapped. "Not anymore," I said softly. "It's ours now, every one of us who's sick of being treated like we rent our own homes." That was the moment everything shifted. Her grip on the HOA cracked. The crowd started murmuring, nodding, whispering agreement. Karen's face burned red. She grabbed her papers and stormed out, her assistant scrambling behind her. I stayed behind, answering questions, calming the crowd. It wasn't about gloating. It was about reclaiming fairness. As people filed out, a few neighbors shook my hand. One older woman said, "You gave us our peace back, son." When I got home that night, I stood in my driveway looking up at the quiet suburban sky. The streetlights glowed softly, the air still and warm. For the first time in months, I felt calm again. But something told me Karen wasn't done yet. The look in her eyes before she left, that wasn't defeat. That was planning. And I knew one thing about HOA Karens like her: they don't quit. They come back meaner. I should have known it wouldn't end quietly. HOA presidents like Karen Latham didn't accept defeat. They plotted their comeback like generals after a lost battle. For a few peaceful weeks, Cedar Ridge estates felt different. People smiled more. Neighbors chatted over fences again. The fines stopped showing up. The HOA's enforcement cart barely drove by. But that calm, that sweet silence, was just the eye of the storm. It started with whispers. Robert, the neighbor, who always mowed perfectly straight lines in his lawn, knocked on my door one evening. He looked worried. "You hear what she's doing?" he asked. I frowned. "Who?" "Karen. She's telling people you're going to raise rents on the land, that you'll start charging us just to live here." I sighed, already expecting this. "She's spreading fear," I said. "Classic move. But fear is contagious." Within a week, my mailbox filled with anonymous letters, some supportive, others accusing. "You think you're the hero, but you're just as power-hungry as her. We don't want to pay rent to another landlord." I didn't respond. Not yet. I wanted proof of how far she'd go. Proof came soon. One morning, I stepped outside to find my mailbox smashed. The wood splintered, the flag bent, and a single sheet of paper nailed to the post. Not our landlord. I stood there for a minute, staring at it. The sun was barely up. Across the street, Karen's black SUV sat idling. I didn't need to see her face. I could feel her watching. That same afternoon, I got a notice from the city zoning department. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint claiming my land transfer was fraudulent. It was signed anonymous. But the attached documentation? All sourced directly from the HOA office. I laughed, half disbelief, half admiration. Karen wasn't just angry. She was strategic. But she'd made a mistake. She underestimated how much I'd learned from her. I called my lawyer, Mark Dalton. "She's trying to get the city involved now," I told him. He chuckled on the other end. "Of course she is. But relax. I already filed your ownership record with the county. It's airtight. So what's the move? I asked. Let her dig her own grave, he said. When she's done, we'll drop the hammer. Over the next week, Karen escalated. She organized an emergency HOA election, claimed the board needed new leadership. She sent flyers through mailboxes saying the integrity of the neighborhood was at risk. She even went door to door, smiling fake and shaking hands, painting me as some corporate villain who'd swooped in to profit off the community. I watched it all quietly from my porch, pretending to ignore her. Because the truth was, she was playing my game now. Then came the board meeting that changed everything. Karen had called it under the pretense of transparency. The whole neighborhood showed up. The hall was packed, standing room only. I arrived late on purpose, letting the tension build. When I walked in, the whispers turned to silence. Karen stood at the podium, voice raised, righteous anger dripping from every word. We are a community under attack, she declared. Our homes, our peace, our values, all jeopardized by one man who thinks he can buy power. She looked straight at me. Mr. Lewis doesn't care about our families. He cares about control. He wants to profit from us. From you, the crowd murmured. Some nodded, others frowned. I stood still, hands clasped, waiting for her to finish. When she paused, I walked slowly to the front. My boots echoed on the tile. Every eye followed me. I took the microphone gently. Can I respond? She hesitated, then smirked. Go ahead. I looked around the room. Karen's right about one thing, I said. I did buy the land. But not for profit. For protection. Because this HOA, under her leadership, fined veterans for flagpoles, parents for chalk drawings, and seniors for faded mailboxes. I didn't buy this neighborhood to own it. I bought it so we could finally live in it. A few gasps. A few claps. Karen's jaw tightened. Lies, she snapped. Then why did you file a false fraud complaint? I asked. The crowd turned. She froze. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. On the projector behind me, I displayed a series of public records, showing the complaint came directly from her HOA email address. The room erupted. You forged a city complaint? One resident shouted. Karen's face went pale. I was protecting the community. She stammered. No, I said. You were protecting your control. The vote that followed wasn't even close. By the end of the night, Karen Latham was removed as HOA president. The board voted unanimously to dissolve the enforcement committee. I walked out into the cool night air, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from release. Neighbors patted my back. Some hugged me. And across the street, Karen stood in the shadows by her SUV, watching everything crumble. For a moment, our eyes met. No words. Just that silent understanding. The game was over, or so I thought. 2 days later, I found a legal envelope waiting on my doorstep. It was thick, heavy, and stamped with a name I hadn't seen before. Latham & Associates, LLC. Karen had hired a lawyer. The fight wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. And this time, she was coming for my ownership itself. The letter sat on my kitchen counter for a full hour before I opened it. I just stared at it. That thick envelope stamped with Latham & Associates, LLC. It was almost poetic. Karen had gone from HOA president to litigant, clinging to power the only way she knew how, through intimidation. When I finally tore it open, I found exactly what I expected. A lawsuit. Filed in Travis County Court, the claim? Improper acquisition of community land and unlawful interference with HOA operations. It was a desperate move, but a smart one. Karen wasn't trying to win the case. She was trying to bury me in legal fees. I called my lawyer, Mark Dalton, immediately. He met me the next morning at a coffee shop downtown, the same spot where I'd signed the property papers months earlier. He flipped through the lawsuit, sipping his espresso with a smirk. She's really throwing everything at you, he said. Fraud, bad faith, emotional distress. She even cited the HOA's community morale clause. I laughed. That's not even a real law. No, he said, but it sounds scary to people who don't know better. And that's her entire strategy. He leaned forward. But don't worry, we'll handle it. You just have to stay quiet. No confrontations, no social media. Let her dig deeper. That was easier said than done. Because while the legal fight played out in paperwork and court dates, Karen took her war to the streets, literally. She started hosting community awareness meetings, where she spun the lawsuit as a noble fight to reclaim the neighborhood. She called me a corporate manipulator and accused me of profiting off hardworking families. She even got a local blogger to write a hit piece. The Man Who Bought Cedar Ridge, Power, Greed, and the Death of Suburbia. It went mildly viral. And for the first time, I started getting dirty looks in the grocery store. It was brilliant psychological warfare. She couldn't win legally, so she went after my reputation. One evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I saw 2 police cruisers parked near my house. My stomach dropped. I stepped out cautiously. An officer approached. "Evening, sir. We got a report about illegal construction happening on this property." I blinked. "Construction? There's nothing being built here." The officer shrugged. "Probably a misunderstanding. We just had to check it out." I looked past him, and there she was again. Karen, standing by her mailbox, pretending to chat with a neighbor, eyes fixed on me. She didn't even try to hide the smile. That night, I sat alone in my study, staring at the framed copy of the property deed hanging on my wall. I could have fought her fire with fire, but something inside me told me to wait, because Mark was right. Sometimes you win not by striking harder, but by letting your opponent collapse under their own arrogance. And Karen, she was collapsing fast. Weeks passed. Court filings, motions, depositions, all of it slowly eating at her. Mark kept me updated with quiet confidence. "Her lawyer's bleeding money," he said over the phone one afternoon. Latham & Associates was basically her brother-in-law's firm. "They've never handled property law before. It's a circus." "Good," I said. "Let them keep performing." By midsummer, the case finally reached its first hearing. The courtroom was small, a neutral beige space that smelled faintly of old carpet and stale coffee. Karen sat across from me, her jaw set, eyes burning with the kind of anger that comes from losing control. Her lawyer fumbled through opening arguments, painting me as some predatory investor exploiting suburban families. Then Mark stood. "Calm, steady, surgical. Your Honor," he began, "what my client did was entirely legal. Public records proved the land sale was legitimate, properly recorded, and disclosed to all relevant parties. The HOA has no ownership rights to the land. Their only recourse is cooperation, or dissolution." He placed a thick binder on the table, color-coded, tabbed, flawless. Karen's lawyer froze mid-sentence. The judge flipped through the documents, nodding slightly. Then he looked up at Karen's lawyer. "I see no evidence of fraud here," he said. "In fact, it appears your client's HOA acted improperly in attempting foreclosure against Mr. Lewis in the first place." Karen's face turned white. The judge wasn't just dismissing her claims. He was calling her actions illegal. After the hearing, Mark and I stepped outside into the blinding Texas sun. He grinned, slipping his sunglasses on. "Well," he said, "that was satisfying." I exhaled, finally feeling the weight lift. But something still lingered in my chest, that sense that Karen wasn't done, and I was right. 2 days later, I woke to the sound of a truck idling outside my house. I looked out the window, a moving truck and Karen's SUV parked beside it. She was leaving. For a long moment, I just stood there watching as she directed the movers, barking orders like she still ran something. Then she saw me in the window. Our eyes met one last time. No words, no gestures. Just that cold stare of a woman who'd lost everything she built her identity on. A minute later, she turned away, got into her car, and drove off. By the following week, her house was listed for sale. And something strange happened. The whole neighborhood changed. People smiled again. Kids played outside. The HOA board, under new leadership, started rewriting the bylaws. Simpler, fairer, more human. I didn't attend the meetings. I didn't have to. My part was done. Months later, I stood outside my house, coffee in hand, watching a moving van pull into Karen's old driveway. A young couple stepped out, bright-eyed, hopeful, unaware of the chaos that once ruled this street. The woman waved at me. "Hey there! We're your new neighbors." I smiled back. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge." As I turned to head inside, I noticed something new nailed to the community board by the park. A simple wooden sign, freshly painted. "Welcome home. No more fines. just neighbors. I stared at it for a long moment, smiling to myself. Karen Latham tried to ruin me, but in the end, she built me. Months passed. The air in Cedar Ridge felt different, lighter, calmer. No more warning letters tucked under doors. No more violation notices about mailbox colors or lawn height. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt human again. I walked past the park one morning, the same park the HOA once claimed as exclusive community property. Now it had a new bench with a plaque that read, "Dedicated to the residents, not the rules." It made me laugh softly every time I saw it. Still, part of me couldn't let go. Not of anger, but of curiosity. I wanted to understand why people like Karen did what they did. Why power over mailbox flags and fence paint could turn ordinary neighbors into tyrants. So I went digging. Through public records, I discovered something that made my jaw tighten. Karen's HOA had been mismanaging funds for years. Over $200,000 in maintenance expenses had no receipts or audit trail. And worse, they'd been double charging homeowners for legal compliance fees that didn't exist. That's when I realized it was never just about control. It was about money. I decided to do something about it, not for revenge, but for accountability. I worked with a journalist from the Austin Chronicle, a guy named Rob Fields, someone who'd covered local corruption stories before. I gave him everything, the documents, emails, internal HOA memos. He verified every line. 2 weeks later, his article dropped. Headline, HOACorruption scandal, former president accused of embezzling community funds. The story spread like wildfire across the state. Karen's name was suddenly everywhere, and not in the way she liked. She tried to deny it, but the paper trail was airtight. I thought that would be the end of it. But justice, I learned, has its own rhythm. A month later, I got a call from Mark. "Hey, you might want to sit down for this," he said. "Karen was arrested this morning. Fraud, misappropriation, obstruction. Her brother-in-law's firm is under investigation too." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just let the silence settle, the kind that feels like closure. I wasn't happy, not exactly, but I was free. A week later, I was invited to the first community gathering under the new HOA leadership. They'd renamed it the Cedar Ridge Neighborhood Council. No fines, no threats, just cooperation. I almost didn't go. But that night, I walked over anyway. The park was lit with string lights, music playing softly. Kids ran around laughing, neighbors shared food, people smiled at each other, something I hadn't seen here in years. As I stood at the edge of the crowd, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Linda, one of the older residents who'd once sided with Karen. She looked a little nervous. "I just wanted to say," she began, "I'm sorry for how we treated you." I nodded. "You don't need to apologize." She smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but thank you for what you did. We got our neighborhood back." Later that evening, the new HOA head, a guy named Chris, took the mic. He cleared his throat and said, "We all know this neighborhood went through hell. But thanks to one man's patience and persistence, Cedar Ridge survived. So tonight, we dedicate this to him." Everyone turned toward me. I froze. Then, from behind him, 2 people carried out a small wooden sign, like the one Karen used to hang HOA warnings on. But this one was different, painted in bold white letters. "Justice Echo, in memory of what we learned." The crowd clapped. Some people even cheered. I didn't know what to say. All I could manage was a small smile, because the truth was, I hadn't done it for applause. I did it because somewhere deep down, I believed people deserved peace. Even after all the noise, the letters, the lies, peace was possible. That night, as the crowd faded and the lights dimmed, I walked back home under the soft hum of crickets and street lamps. I paused by my gate, the same one Karen once threatened to fine me for repainting. And I just stared at it for a while, smiling to myself. It wasn't victory I felt. It was balance. Weeks later, a letter arrived, a clean, official envelope stamped with a familiar seal. But this time, it wasn't from lawyers or HOA committees. It was from the county clerk's office. I opened it carefully. Inside was a certificate confirming that Cedar Ridge community was now officially deed reclassified under resident ownership. Every homeowner now owned part of the community land. No HOA, no central control, just shared trust. I stared at the paper for a long time. It felt like the final chapter of something that had once consumed my life. That evening, I poured a glass of whiskey and stepped onto my porch. The sunset stretched across the rooftops, warm, golden, endless. I whispered to myself, justice doesn't always echo loud. Sometimes it whispers through peace. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt home.